authorities on the world, in the world. And we're talking about the EU specifically, the UN and NATO. Those are in specific control of one of the three components each.
Okay, so basically what I get from this is that there's a floor in one of the facilities in Area 51 called Alice's Floor, and that it has a stuffed white rabbit permanently mounted above the entrance to the Project Looking Glass room. On this floor in Area 51 exists a jump room, which utilizes an Einstein-Rosen bridge, a Stargate, and a looking glass device. And he also spoke of a yellow cube which was given to us by the Orions, which seems to work also like the looking glass in that it shows future probable timelines. This floor is the second level of Building 4, or Level 4-2, which I find particularly interesting because famously, in the 1979 novel A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, at the end, spoiler alert, the answer to life, universe, and everything around it stated to be 42. Obviously, it's a joke, a nonsensical, simplistic answer to the most complex question in the history of time. But yet, here's supposedly a floor in Area 51 that has figured out how to allow people to traverse time as they would the other three dimensions. And the floor is 42. So, maybe a little Easter egg there by Mr. Douglas Adams, depending on how in the know he was. But from what I can tell from listening to many testimonies from different people is that the descriptions of the devices and how they work all seem to be pretty steady. So it does in fact seem like they exist. Now Dan states that the main three components of these were all split up to keep whoever would seek to use them in check. But what if those weren't the only devices? Now what if someone else had cracked the code? And he claims that the looking glass was reverse engineered from the Sumerian cylinder seals and that they were first introduced to this tech after recovering it from a downed UFO in the 40s. That might not be the entire story. In 2004, Washington lawyer Andrew Basiago had come out and claimed that from 68 to 72, he was involved in a DARPA-run project that was using tech which they had developed from going over Nikola Tesla's schematics after he had died. Now, he stated that this tech was being used to move between different periods of time, and that from the ages 7 to 12, he was part of an operation named Project Pegasus. Now, this is especially interesting to me because it was Donald Trump's uncle, John Trump, who was brought in to go over Tesla's work after he had passed in 43. And Trump's uncle John was an American electrical engineer, an inventor, a physicist, and a professor at MIT. So this is one of the rare people who actually knew what he was looking at when going over these notes. Now, it's also worth noting that John Trump and Julian Assange look nearly identical. Make what you want of that. But back to Basiago. Here's what he has to say.
The use of that device as a teleportation device was accidentally discovered when they constructed a model of one of the drawings that was in Nikola Tesla's papers upon his death in 1943. And it just said Tesla Energetic Array, or Energetic Array in his original documents. And they didn't know at first that it was a teleportation device, a teleporter. They set it up there in that room in Curtiss-Wright, and what I was told is that a technician walked through the energy field to retrieve a screwdriver on a workbench in the lab, and he suddenly disappeared, so that his supervisor thought he had been disintegrated by this Tesla device. 6 weeks or 6 months later, he shows up at the door of the facility, of that very lab, and his supervisor collapses, literally collapses, believing that he's come back from the dead, or grateful that he didn't die in the development of this Tesla device, the construction of this Tesla device. And then he told the tale of how he fell through a tunnel, apparently in the time-space continuum, and popped out in Africa, where he was virtually deified by the local tribe that he had teleported to, until he explained that, no, I'm just an ordinary human being. He tried to communicate to them that in a way in which they would take him to the national government, he would be able to get home, and he did. And it was either 6 weeks or 6 months. I think it was 6 weeks. But that's, in fact, the story we were told in our training. So they realized that this Tesla device, in Tesla's original papers, that had actually been seized by the War Department, kept in the National Archives under the Alien Property Act in 44, and then forwarded to Los Alamos when the Manhattan Project physicists began gathering there to build the atomic bomb. They thought, well, let's send Tesla's paperwork to the physicists in the world who can make the most sense of them. So ultimately, they were sent to Los Alamos when the Los Alamos Scientific Laboratory was being started to build the atomic bomb. And that's where they remain to this. Project Pegasus, quote unquote, owed its greatest debt of gratitude to Nikola Tesla. We did use some reverse engineering from downed extraterrestrial craft. We were given some technology by the ET groups that we were in liaison with during these years. But there's no question that time travel is the accomplishment of our species in this planetary context. It wasn't all reverse engineered. In the front of the room were two gray parenthesis-shaped objects that look sort of just like human fingers like this, sort of like, closing parentheses. They were built into their bases, kind of like high-end stereo speakers, and they were about 8 feet high and about 10 feet apart on the floor of the lab there. And on the left boom, there was a technician sitting at a video console with a keyboard. And on the right side, the boom was plugged into a power outlet on the wall that was about the size of the power you would need to power a small-sized industrial piece of equipment, like an industrial lathe or drill press. And my dad had the technician turn on the device. And what I saw was essentially energy that was radiating between the two booms of the device, like water falling in a public sculpture. And then my dad had me go up towards the device, and it looked like raster on a TV set. And there were little squiggles at 3-inch intervals coming out of portals of light, sort of light lime green portals of light. So there were these bluish green squiggles that were swimming across the field of raster, kind of like tiny little tadpoles. And my dad explained that we were going to step back, and on the count of 3, he's going to hold my hand, and we were going to jump through that field of energy. So we practiced a couple times, and then on the third try, we leapt through the field of energy, and we immediately found ourselves in a bluish-white tunnel of light, and moving forward at a very rapid rate of speed, but also in a way where you perceived that we weren't moving at all. And as my father had stated, we might get separated during the jump, and in fact, he was sort of sucked through the wall as the tunnel began to fragment or compartmentalize as we got to our destination. And as my dad had described, we would find ourselves on a hillside somewhere else in the United States, and that hillside ended up being the state capitol complex in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I was one of 140 gifted and talented American school children who were enrolled in Project Pegasus. Some of the time travel devices required the involvement of children, and I'll explain that later in my lecture. But that's from 2 sources many years removed that stated it was 14 groups of 10 children, and each of the groups was indicated by a color. The first child teleportees were Latin American orphans, literally homeless kids. And so my dad said, so you, and I said, well, who was the next? He said, you were. Remember I took you up to Curtis Wright, and we jumped and met with Dr. Agnew at the labs? I said, oh, so that means I was the first American kid to teleport. He said, yes. So that was sort of the beginning of the involvement of kids in teleportation. That the very Manhattan Project physicists who gave us the atomic bomb, a weapon of mass destruction, I think a very negative thing for that reason, also gave us a very beneficial set of technologies, and those are teleportation, Tesla teleportation, and other time travel devices and methodologies. One of the major things they did with their intelligence findings from time travel is brief future presidents of their destinies, beginning roughly with Jimmy Carter. Project Pegasus was carried out under the aegis of DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. When I was enrolled, it was ARPA. Project Pegasus, at the time that I joined it in 1969, was not primarily a time travel project. It was an intelligence program for the CIA. So by 1970, when the 8 methodologies that I'm going to describe today had been derived, Project Pegasus existed primarily to perform remote sensing in time of past and future events to aid the U.S. government in contingency planning for future events. In addition to time travel being captured by the military during World War II, it's true to say that it has also been captured by the Central Intelligence Agency, which I don't think has a very high reputation for proper conduct around the world, assassinating foreign leaders, advising the military to invade sovereign countries, and throwing elections and so forth, and also undermining the civil liberties of Americans and foreign nationals. But I'm proud of my dad, and I think you can say that he was a white hat inside the intelligence community because, among other things, he was actively urging the public adoption, the declassification and deployment of Tesla teleportation for civilian functions, for civilian transport, when he was serving on this project. So I have to ask, when he had that heart attack at age 53 at his desk at Parsons, was it just because of where his health was, or was it a hit? Because my dad was somewhat of a dissident voice within Project Pegasus, and I think he was a moral arbiter in that sense, and I'm proud of him. He also had worked at an elite think tank called the Thomas A. Edison Research Labs in West Orange, New Jersey, that were literally physically next door to the historical Edison Labs. There was just one doorway that was always locked that divided the Edison Labs that Hillary Clinton rescued as First Lady and turned into a national historical site and saved over 1 million papers of Edison and his staff as First Lady. She's never credited for that, but it was a great thing for the country. What I'm saying is that Edison's labs were lying fallow for 50 years until Hillary Clinton saved them and made them a national historical monument. At the Edison labs, my dad did something very conspicuous, which he informed me about when I was a kid on the project, which is he repeated Nikola Tesla's teleportation experiments that Tesla had first begun during his famous stay at Colorado Springs, Colorado in 1899. After the